Anyway, Rebecca, huge thank you. Thank you so much for coming up from London to Kendal, and a massive warm welcome. Let's start from the very beginning. How did you come upon the idea of cycling from your home in London all the way to Tehran?
I think it had different beginnings. So I think for a long time I wanted to do a big adventure. So I had this idea that I wanted to do sort of something kind of big and exciting and adventurous for a while, but I wasn't sure specifically what that was going to be. And then when I was working at the International Bar Association, I started, as you said, started writing a lot about the Arab Spring and the Middle East. And I already had a strong interest in the Middle East. And then this developed really into professional fascination with the area, and also something of a frustration at the way I felt that the Middle East was often portrayed through the Western press. And I thought that potentially I could have my big adventure before I sort of settled down and had children and was slightly more restrained in what I could do, and also get to know the Middle East better at the same time. And then there was a moment, I think, when really kind of the germ of this idea sort of just started to sprout. And this was when I was in Lebanon, and I was reporting there for the IBA. And I had to get up to the northern border to speak to some of the refugee camps there, to speak to some of the refugees. And I wasn't sure how to get up there. And it was that buses were notoriously unreliable, and a taxi was quite expensive. And I just had this idea that maybe I could cycle up. And a lot of people warned me off doing this, cycling up there. They said that the road wasn't cyclable. And I was very nearly put off by it, actually. And then I thought, well, I'll just give it a go anyway. And so I took this coastal road, the old coastal road, and it was lovely. It was actually a really, really lovely, beautiful and fairly straightforward cycle. I mean, if you're going to cycle through any country in the Middle East, Lebanon is the one to do because it's so tiny. I mean, it's really just a little slip of a country. So I got on my bike and I went up the coast, and I just sort of, I thought at that point, okay, maybe it's not going to be as difficult to do these things that people are warning you against, as you might think at first. And so I thought, well, maybe if I could go across Lebanon, like maybe I could go a little bit further. And then so I thought, okay, maybe I could get across the whole of the Middle East. So then this idea kind of formed, and a year or so later, I set off.
I'd like to read a little extract right from the beginning, because I think it captures the tone in all sorts of ways, and it tackles the subject of, this idea of cycling across the Middle East to Tehran. The idea seems absurd, but it comes on with a rush, as if the notion has been sitting there all along, just waiting to be found. I will travel with nothing but the barest essentials and speak to local people to understand their concerns. I will peel back the layers of artifice and prejudice to unearth the human stories underneath. And I will do this like Patrick Leigh-Fermor, not as a vagrant or a tourist, but as an errant sage or cognoscenti with an eye to revealing the truth. At least, that is what I'll tell my mother. I absolutely love that, actually. And how did your mother respond?
Histrionically, I'd say. My mother is Hungarian, and she's not restrained with her emotions. And so she sent me an email, actually, shortly before I left, which to go through a few of the words and phrases that she used, I think probably sum up the gist of the sentiments, which were things dangerous, foolish, juvenile, risking life and limb, family disintegrating, robbed and raped. She sort of went on. I sort of had this restrained smattering of about sort of 15 exclamation marks throughout. And she concluded this email, I think I shall have to hit the bottle or go mad. I'll start with the first option. And so she was, as mothers are, and now I'm a mother, I can have a bit more sympathy, I think, with how she felt. And I think if she didn't feel like that, perhaps it would have been a bit worrying. But I think she did have some concerns about it.
And other friends too did as well, according to your book. I mean, and there is a serious point underneath all of this, isn't there, which is about the assumptions that we in the West often make about the Middle East. And you write that it's hardly surprising given how that's presented in the press. You have this cracking phrase, the region has been reduced to a troika of incendiary tablet bullet points, bombs, burkas and bigots.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, and one of the motivations was that I felt a frustration with how the media, the Western media in particular, portrayed the Middle East. And it's partly just to do with the nature of the media, and the sense that if it bleeds, it leads. You know, the media is driven by events, by conflict. And so inevitably, it's always going to be writing about the worst things that happen. And so when you read about the Middle East, you get this sense that it's in this kind of permanent sense of conflict and crisis all the time. But it also, where the Middle East is concerned, there is an underlying element of Islamophobia as well, which adds to this. And, you know, there have been countless studies that have been done about this. There was one by the University of Cardiff School of Journalism that I think looked at 1,000 articles between 2000 and 2008. And they found that references to extremist and Muslims outweighed those references to moderate ones by, I think, 17 to 1, like a really kind of staggering amount. And I think the most common terms used were a fanatical, fundamentalist, kind of extremist, radical. And so you kind of, naturally you get the sense that this is what, you know, the whole place is like. And in America, it's not that different. And there was also a study that was done in 2015 by the universities of Illinois and Arkansas. And that looked at television broadcasts. And it found that I think 81% of television broadcasts in America about terrorists were about Islamist terrorists.
81%. Wow.
When in reality, I think according to FBI data, only 6% of terrorists in the US are actually Islamist. And so, you know, you get this very, very skewed sense, I think, of the risk factors involved in going to somewhere like the Middle East. And it's, you know, it's divisive and it's dangerous. And so what I wanted to do really was to go and look at the Middle East from a different perspective, you know, rather than a kind of top-down perspective, from the perspective of politics and from the leadership of these countries. Because often the leaders, I think, are seen as a shorthand for the character and the culture of the countries that they're leading. But in reality, there's often a strong disconnect between them and the people, you know, in most of these authoritarian countries. So when we read about Iran, we tend to read about the supreme leaders, the ayatollahs, the clerics, but that's not Iran, as we're seeing now. That isn't really what Iran is all about. And so, yes, I wanted to look from the bottom up, and I thought a bike would be an excellent way of getting that different perspective.
Yes, and you're right, I wasn't doing the trip because I believed it would be dangerous. I was doing it because I was convinced it would be safe.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it was interesting to me that a lot of people thought that I was this kind of adrenaline junkie or risk taker. And I'm really not, I'm quite a coward, I think, actually. Like, I'm really not like that at all. And I was doing it, I wasn't, there are obviously kind of pockets of conflict, pockets of danger in the Middle East. But the Islamists are not running rampage over the whole place. And they weren't in 2015 when I left, when ISIS was really at its heights then. But even then, they were circumscribed. They were easily avoidable. And, there are brilliant, brave journalists who are going to these places and they are reporting on the events there, and that's incredibly important to do that. But I just think we need to maintain some level of awareness that isn't the entirety of the situation. This isn't reflective of the whole region. And so, yes, I was quite confident that I would be safe there because I knew the region, I knew it to be very hospitable. And the crime rates were low compared to a lot of other places in the world. The food's amazing. And so I was less confident about my own ability, to my own sort of physical and mental abilities, and whether I would sort of make it through to the other side. But in terms of the people I would meet, yeah, I did feel quite confident that I would survive
So you set off convinced you're going to be safe, and with this ambition of getting between the extremes, as you talked about it, what's in between that space between, you know, democracy and dictatorship, tyranny and terror? What are the stories of the ordinary people? And that was the reporting that you felt was missing and that you really wanted to do. And you set off on the 25th of July, 2015. You were on the road for a year on a bicycle. You weren't an avid cyclist before you set off. I mean, why the bike?
No, I'm still not really.
Even more not.
People here, it's a bit embarrassing because people, I think, assume that I am really kind of this fanatical cyclist, and they ask me all sorts of awkward questions about the technicalities of cycling, none of which I can answer. No, I wasn't. I really wasn't at all. And in fact, I hadn't done any training before I left at all. And I mean, it was mainly laziness more than anything else. But I just didn't really have time to go on these long bike rides but before I set off. I was too busy sort of trying to organise the trip, and I only stopped working a couple of weeks beforehand, and I didn't get my bike until the day before I left. The day before, because it wasn't meant to be like that. But Kona very kindly donated it as sponsorship. But it was their 2016 Kona Sutra model, which I thought was nicely risque because it was between my legs for the next year. I thought that was quite a nice little frisson of excitement. And so they very kindly got me this bike, but they could only get it very late on. So it arrived the day before. I didn't have time to practice on it. I didn't have time to get it configured to me. I didn't have time to practice cycling with panniers. And so I spent the first week, you know, basically just veering into kind of bushes and traffic like a mad alcoholic before I could actually work out how to steer the thing. And so it was all like, yeah, it was kind of a little bit chaotic. And I wasn't as fit as I would have liked to have been at the beginning. And France was a total nightmare because of that. Because it looks flat on the map, but it's not in reality.
Hi, if you liked this interview with Rebecca Lowe, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and don't forget to check out our Kendal Mountain Player, where you'll find loads more great content like this. Link is in the description below.